12-year-old boy stands in court, alone. No lawyer, no protection. Just himself and the truth. But when he exposes something far bigger than his own innocence, will justice truly be on his side? Or will power and corruption silence him? Have you ever seen an innocent person struggle against a system designed to work against them? Do you think a child can change the rules of the game? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe in justice, hit that like button. Subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge the system and inspire change. Now, let's step inside the courtroom, where justice is about to be put to the ultimate test. The air in the courtroom was thick, not with justice, but with curiosity, judgment, and something unspoken. Every seat was filled. The audience murmured, shifting in their chairs. Reporters lined the back, pens scratching against notepads, cameras clicking in rapid succession. The weight of anticipation pressed down like a storm waiting to break. At the center of it all, Noah Carter stood alone. A 12-year-old black boy in a suit too big for his frame. The sleeves swallowed his wrists, the fabric sagged at the shoulders. But his posture? Unshaken. His hands rested at his sides, steady. His dark eyes scanned the room, sharp, focused, unafraid. He didn't shift his weight, didn't fidget, didn't blink. Just stood there, unwavering. Bang. Judge Henry Calloway brought his gavel down, the crack of wood against wood echoing through the silent chamber. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried weight. Noah Carter, do you truly understand what's happening here? He adjusted his glasses, peering down at the boy. This isn't a debate. This is a court of law. The murmurs in the audience hushed. Noah looked up at the judge, not with defiance, not with arrogance, but with something far more unsettling. Certainty. A beat of silence, then he spoke. I know, Your Honor. Another pause. The room seemed to hold its breath. A flicker of something crossed Noah's face. Not fear, not anger, just truth. And then, his voice steady as stone, and I also know this isn't justice. A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. A woman in the front row clutched her purse tighter. A man in the back exhaled sharply. The reporters stopped writing, their pens hovering over their notepads. At the prosecution's table, Daniel Moore leaned back slightly, tapping his fingers against the desk. The confident smirk he'd worn earlier faded just a fraction. And in the farthest row, near the exit, Captain William Grant watched, unmoving, expressionless. But for a split second, just one, his smirk twitched. Noah didn't look at him, didn't turn around, but he knew. This trial wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. It was about proving the truth. And that meant only one thing. The real fight hadn't even begun. Noah Carter had always found peace in the library. The steady hum of the fluorescent lights, the scent of old books, thick like history. The quiet. It was a place where facts mattered, where words had meaning, where law was supposed to be absolute. That night was no different. Noah sat at his usual table, a well-worn copy of the Constitution and the rights of the accused open in front of him. His notebook sat beside it, half filled with neat, careful handwriting. He was taking notes, studying, learning, absorbing every line of text like armor. Then the doors slammed open. The sharp thud of boots against tiles shattered the silence. Gasps filled the air as heads turned. A chair scraped loudly against the floor. Noah didn't move. Not at first. He barely had time to process the sudden shift in the atmosphere before a heavy hand gripped his arm. Hands behind your back. Now the voice was firm, rehearsed, final. Noah turned, confused. Officer Grayson. Stocky build, square jaw, eyes that didn't look at him so much as through him. Another officer stood just behind him, blocking the path to the door. Noah stiffened. His mind moved fast, scanning for some logical explanation. Excuse me? His voice was even. Calm. Grayson was already pulling him up. Metal cuffs snapped tight around his wrists. The library erupted. The librarian, a woman who had known Noah for years, gasped but didn't move. Other patrons whispered. A few stood, but no one intervened. Not one. What's going on? Noah asked, his voice sharper now. Grayson didn't answer. The second officer, his partner, Officer Reynolds, was the one who spoke. Flat, unapologetic. Suspect in a burglary, matches the description. Noah froze. A cold weight settled in his stomach. What description? Reynolds barely glanced at him. Black kid, hoodie. A pause. A heavy, sickening pause. Noah's pulse pounded in his ears. He looked down at himself. His hoodie was navy blue, not black, but it didn't matter. It never did. No fingerprints, no footage, no real evidence, just a vague description. And Noah fit the mold. He tried again, keeping his voice steady. Check the library's records. I've been here for hours. Grayson hesitated, just for a second. Then a sharp look from Reynolds, and the hesitation was gone. Grayson tightened his grip. You can explain it down at the station. A pit formed in Noah's stomach. This was happening, and he wasn't sure there was anything he could do to stop it. A few feet away, the librarian clutched her hands together. She knew Noah. She knew he wasn't a criminal. He saw it in her face, the war between conscience and fear. She didn't say a word. Noah didn't fight. He knew better. He had read too many cases, studied too many laws. He knew what happened when a black kid resisted. So he kept his shoulders square and walked out of the library on his own 2 feet. But as the station doors swung shut behind him, the air inside felt different, heavier, like it had already decided he wasn't leaving anytime soon. Daniel Moore had been in courtrooms long enough to know when a case was supposed to be easy. And this should have been simple. A burglary, a suspect caught, a trial, open and shut. Moore prided himself on upholding the law, on trusting the system he had dedicated his career to. If the police arrested a suspect, it meant they had reason to. That was how the system worked. That was how it had to work. But as he sat at the prosecutor's table, flipping through the case file, something felt off. No fingerprints, no clear security footage, a vague witness description. His jaw tightened. He had seen this before. Years ago, there had been another case. A black teenager, accused of a robbery he didn't commit. The evidence was thin, but the system moved fast. The kid went to juvie. Years later, DNA proved his innocence. Moore had told himself it was just one mistake, a fluke. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked, didn't it? He exhaled sharply, pushing the thought away. He glanced up at the defense table. The boy, Noah Carter, sat still, back straight, watching, studying. Most kids in his position would have been terrified, crying, pleading, not Noah. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus. Moore felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Doubt. And then, from across the courtroom, he felt another set of eyes on him. At the back of the courtroom, Captain William Grant sat motionless, hands folded in his lap. He wasn't supposed to be there. Police captains didn't waste time watching juvenile cases. But here he was, and he hadn't taken his eyes off Noah Carter since the trial started. The courtroom buzzed, whispers, camera flashes, the low hum of tension. But Grant remained still. Moore felt it, the way Grant watched, not the trial, not the judge, just Noah. A slow, deliberate tapping started, Grant's fingers drumming against the armrest. Not impatient, not restless, controlled, calculated. Moore swallowed. He had worked alongside police for years. He knew how they moved, how they thought. This wasn't normal. And then, just for a moment, Noah turned. His gaze flicked toward Grant, locking eyes across the courtroom. Grant's fingers stilled, and then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a message. Noah didn't react, didn't flinch. He simply turned back toward the judge, his expression unreadable. But Moore saw something shift in the boy's posture. He knew. Whatever was happening in this case, Captain Grant wasn't just watching it. He was controlling it. Monica Carter sat in the front row of the courtroom, her hands gripping the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had always known that being black in America meant fighting battles you never signed up for. But she never thought her son, her baby, would have to fight one this soon. Noah was 12. 12. A child. Yet here he was, sitting at the defendant's table in a suit that didn't quite fit, defending himself against a system that had already made up its mind. Her heart clenched. She wanted to scream, to demand that they look at him, really look at him. See him for who he was. A bright, kind, curious boy who loved books and asked too many questions. Not a criminal, but she knew better. Screaming wouldn't change anything. Monica had spent her whole life watching people like her lose against this system. Innocent men dragged into prison cells, families shattered, the world moving on like nothing happened. She had taught Noah how to be careful, how to keep his hands visible when talking to police, how to be polite, never argue, never resist. And still, it hadn't been enough. Because when they decided you were guilty, it didn't matter how many laws you followed. The night before the trial, Monica had tried to reason with Noah. They sat in the dim glow of their small kitchen, untouched plates of food between them. Baby, let the public defender do their job, she had pleaded, her voice raw. This isn't your fight. Noah had just stared at her, his eyes dark and steady. But it is, Mama. She shook her head. No, this is bigger than you. Noah set his fork down carefully. I know, that's why I have to do it. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. Noah, if I don't stand up, who will? His voice didn't waver. If they can do this to me, they can do it to any black kid walking down the street. And next time, maybe he won't get to walk away. Monica felt her breath catch. She had raised him to be strong. She had raised him to be smart. But she never imagined that one day he'd have to be both just to survive. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters whispered, camera lenses zoomed in, spectators leaned forward, waiting for the show to begin. Noah stood up, slow, deliberate. His hands rested flat on the table as he looked up at Judge Henry Calloway, a child standing in front of a system built to break men. Calloway adjusted his glasses, peering down at the boy. Do you understand the charges against you? Noah lifted his chin. Yes, Your Honor. The judge's gaze flicked toward the public defender seated beside him. And do you understand that you have the right to legal representation? Silence. Monica felt her pulse quicken. And then, in a voice calm, clear, and steady, Noah spoke the words that changed everything. I'd like to represent myself. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, a few audible scoffs, the judge's brow furrowed. Excuse me? Noah didn't flinch. I'll be defending myself. Monica's breath caught. Oh, baby. At the prosecutor's table, Daniel Moore stiffened. His fingers tapped the desk once, then stopped. This was unexpected, and from the back row, Captain Grant smiled. Not surprised, amused. Judge Calloway studied Noah for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the bench. That's a bold decision, young man. Noah didn't blink. It's the right one. Another murmur rippled through the courtroom. Moore adjusted his tie, his expression carefully neutral. Your Honor, if I may. But before he could finish, Noah turned to face him. You think I'm making a mistake, don't you? The room fell silent again. Moore studied the boy carefully. I think you don't understand what you're up against. Noah's lips pressed together just for a second. Then he smiled, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the courtroom, steady and sure. I know exactly what I'm up against. Another ripple of whispers. Score. Someone coughed. A reporter scribbled furiously in a notepad. Judge Calloway exhaled sharply. Very well. He reached for his gavel. Motion granted. Bang! The sound echoed through the courtroom like a starting gun. The game had begun, and Noah Carter had just made the first move. The courtroom had settled, but an unspoken tension buzzed beneath the surface. Judge Henry Calloway adjusted his glasses, his gaze steady on the boy standing before him. 12 years old, no lawyer, no hesitation. Calloway had seen hundreds, thousands of defendants in his career. Hardened criminals, desperate men, liars, the broken and the guilty. But never a child who walked into his courtroom and asked to take on the law himself. And never a child who, even now, seemed completely unfazed by the weight of the moment. A part of Calloway wanted to dismiss this as foolish bravado, but another part, one he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge, was intrigued. He leaned forward slightly. Mr. Carter, are you sure you wish to continue representing yourself? Noah nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Calloway studied him, then exhaled. Very well, Mr. Moore, proceed with your case. Moore stood, straightening his jacket. He had spent the last 20 years prosecuting criminals, exposing their lies, tearing down their defenses. But this was different. It was strange, standing across from a child, knowing he had to discredit him the same way he would a seasoned criminal. And yet, he reminded himself, this was still a case. He walked to the center of the courtroom, his voice steady and controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts of this case are simple. He turned toward the jury. A convenience store was burglarized. The suspect fled the scene. Law enforcement acted quickly and detained the defendant, Noah Carter, who matched the description. Noah sat still, watching. Moore nodded to the bailiff. Let's begin with the video evidence. A screen flickered to life. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the grainy black and white footage played. A convenience store. A figure in a hoodie walking past the front doors. The timestamp showed 8:37 p.m. This was taken just minutes before the crime, Moore explained, turning back to the jury. The suspect is seen wearing a dark hoodie, just like the defendant was when he was arrested. He let the words settle, then glanced at Noah. But the boy wasn't rattled. If anything, he looked almost amused. A flicker of irritation passed through Moore, but he kept his expression neutral. Now, let's hear from a key witness. A man stood and walked toward the stand. Raymond Ellis. The bailiff swore him in, and Moore approached. Mr. Ellis, please tell the court what you saw the night of the crime. Ellis cleared his throat. I was outside the store. I saw a young black male in a hoodie run past right after the alarm went off. Moore nodded, his tone deliberate. And did you get a good look at his face? Ellis hesitated. Not really. It was dark. Moore didn't like that pause, but he pushed forward. But you're certain it was the defendant? Ellis glanced at Noah. His discomfort was clear. I mean, he looks like the kid I saw, yeah. Silence. Moore turned to the jury. There you have it, a witness who saw a young black male in a hoodie fleeing the scene. He let the statement settle before stepping back toward his seat. The case should have been solid. It should have been enough. But something about the way Noah Carter sat there, calm, unshaken, almost expectant, unnerved him. The courtroom wasn't silent, but it felt like it was. Noah could hear the faint scratch of a pen from the press row, the shuffle of a shoe against the wooden floor, the breath of a juror, just a little unsteady. But most of all, he could feel their eyes on him, waiting, judging. He let them. Then he stood. Noah didn't look at Judge Calloway, didn't look at Moore. He turned to the jury, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. How many of you have ever been followed in a store? A few of them shifted. One woman pressed her lips together. A man in the back frowned. Noah let the question settle. Then, how many of you have ever been stopped by police for no reason? A murmur, a cough. How many of you have ever been guilty of something, just by existing? A ripple went through the room, quiet but heavy. Judge Calloway tapped his gavel lightly. Mr. Carter, get to your point. Noah nodded, but his eyes never left the jury. Yes, Your Honor. My point is this. What you just saw was not evidence. It was an assumption. A dangerous assumption. He turned to Moore, his voice calm but unyielding. You said the witness saw a black boy in a hoodie. That was all they needed. No clear face, no fingerprints, just a black boy in a hoodie. His fingers curled against the table. Let's be honest about what's happening here. If I were white, would I even be here? The courtroom froze. Noah wasn't sure who sucked in a sharp breath, but he heard it. Prosecutor Moore shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie. Noah didn't stop. The truth is, the moment I walked into this courtroom, I wasn't innocent. I was just another black kid someone decided looked guilty. His voice didn't waver. And if that's enough for a conviction, then tell me, how do I prove I didn't do something when the only thing that makes me guilty is who I am? The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Judge Calloway exhaled, rubbing his temple. Moore stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is making this about race rather than the facts. The judge didn't hesitate. Overruled. Noah glanced at him, and for the first time, saw something different in his eyes. Not just skepticism, not just doubt. Curiosity. Noah turned back to the prosecution's table. Mr. Moore, what time did you say this crime took place? Moore hesitated. 8:40 p.m. Noah nodded. And what time did your witness say he saw someone running? Moore glanced at his notes. A little after that, maybe 8:41, 8:42. Noah took a slow breath. Then, with measured movements, he reached into his pocket. The courtroom held its breath. A piece of paper, folded, worn at the edges, slid onto the table. Noah picked it up carefully, turned, and held it up for Judge Calloway. This, Noah said, is my library checkout receipt. The judge adjusted his glasses, took the slip of paper, read, checked out, 8:42 p.m. The reaction was instant. Whispers shot through the room. Someone gasped. Even a reporter in the back froze, pen hovering above their notebook. Noah's voice stayed steady. I checked out a book at 8:42 p.m., 2 minutes after the crime, across town. Silence slammed into the courtroom. For the first time, Moore's entire posture changed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the receipt. The jury exchanged glances. The judge handed the receipt back. His fingers tapped the bench, thoughtful. Noah turned back to Moore. So tell me, Mr. Moore, how was I robbing a store when I was across the city, checking out a book? Moore opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since the trial started, he had no answer. Monica Carter felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. She wanted to believe it was over. The evidence was there. Proof. Undeniable proof. Her son was innocent. And yet, she had seen this before. Injustice didn't always break under the weight of truth. Sometimes it dug its heels in deeper. Across the room, Captain Grant remained still, unmoved, while others whispered, while Moore's case fell apart, while the judge tapped his fingers in thought. Grant just watched. He didn't glance at the receipt, didn't shift in his chair. Instead, he tapped his index finger twice against his armrest. A signal. To whom? Noah wasn't sure, but the way Moore's jaw tensed, it meant something. Grant wasn't worried. Not yet. Like he still had a move left to play. For the first time since the trial began, Noah allowed himself to breathe. He could feel it, the shift in the room. The moment he had revealed his library receipt, the energy inside the courtroom changed. It was subtle at first. A murmur, a frown from a juror, the way Prosecutor Moore's jaw tightened just slightly. Then it became something undeniable. Doubt. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. Even Moore, despite his best efforts, knew it was there. Noah had cracked the foundation of the case, and for the first time, he thought maybe, just maybe, he was going to win. Until everything changed. The courtroom was called back into session the next morning. Noah walked in confident. Then he saw Moore's face. Something was off. Prosecutor Moore sat stiffly at his table, not adjusting his tie, not flipping through his notes. His expression was blank, too blank. Judge Calloway glanced toward him. "Mr. Moore, are you ready to proceed with your next witness?" A pause, a heartbeat too long. Moore exhaled through his nose, then stood. "Your Honor, the prosecution regrets to inform the court that our key witness, Mr. Raymond Ellis, is unavailable to testify." The courtroom erupted, gasps, whispers. A ripple of confusion and speculation. Noah froze. "Unavailable?" Judge Calloway frowned. "What do you mean, unavailable?" Moore shifted. He didn't look at Noah. "Your Honor, Mr. Ellis failed to appear this morning. Law enforcement has attempted to contact him, but he is currently unreachable." A murmur swept through the jury box. Noah's hands clenched. This wasn't right. This wasn't coincidence. His eyes flicked toward the back of the room where Captain Grant sat. Still, silent, watching. And then, he smiled. Noah's pulse pounded in his ears. Ellis was gone. The one witness who could confirm the flimsy nature of the case, the man who had hesitated on the stand, who wasn't even sure if Noah was the person he had seen, had disappeared overnight. And Noah knew exactly why. Judge Calloway's voice broke through the tension. "Mr. Moore, this witness was a critical part of your case. What exactly are you suggesting?" Moore hesitated. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe Mr. Ellis may have left town." Noah's stomach twisted. Left town? His mind raced. Ellis had testified yesterday. He had been right here. He had walked out of the courtroom just like everyone else. And now, less than 24 hours later, he was gone? Noah turned sharply toward Moore. Did he leave town, or did someone make him disappear? A fresh wave of murmurs. Moore's expression hardened. Objection. Speculation. Judge Calloway sighed. Sustained. "Mr. Carter, be careful with your accusations." Noah bit the inside of his cheek, forcing himself to stay calm. Then, slowly, he turned back to Captain Grant. And Grant didn't even try to hide his amusement. A slow, measured smirk pulled at the corners of his lips, and when he met Noah's gaze, his message was clear. "You really thought this was over?" Noah's fingers curled against the table. This had never been about proving his innocence. This had never been a fair fight. The system wasn't going to let him win. Not without a fight. Noah sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The courtroom buzzed with unease. The jury felt the shift. The reporters scribbled furiously, the tension now crackling in the air. But Noah barely heard any of it. All he could think about was Raymond Ellis. Gone. Not missing. Not unavailable. Just gone. And Noah knew. Captain Grant had made it happen. Ellis was the only witness who could have unraveled the case against him. And now he was nowhere to be found. It didn't matter that Noah had an alibi. It didn't matter that Moore's evidence had fallen apart. The system wasn't built to admit mistakes. It was built to protect itself. And Noah? Noah was a problem it wanted to erase. Slowly, Noah turned his head toward the back of the room. Captain Grant was still there, still composed, waiting. And then with deliberate slowness, he tilted his head. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but the message was loud. Sit down, kid. Stop fighting. Stay quiet. Noah's heart pounded, because suddenly this wasn't about proving his innocence anymore. It was about survival. Grant wasn't just playing dirty. He was sending a message. If he could make a witness disappear overnight, what else could he do? To Noah, to his mother, to anyone who dared to push back. Noah swallowed hard, because for the first time, he was afraid. Judge Calloway cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. Mr. Carter, do you wish to proceed? Noah didn't answer, because this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was a war, and wars had casualties. If he kept fighting, what would happen next? Would he be the one to disappear? Would they come after his mother? He wasn't naive. He had read enough cases, seen how people got buried in the system, how truths were smothered, how justice was something written on paper but rarely given in real life. Maybe the smartest thing he could do was stay quiet, accept defeat, get out alive. But if he walked away now, if he let the system crush him like it had crushed so many others before him, what did that mean for the next kid? The one after that? If it wasn't him, it would be someone else. And the cycle would keep going. Noah's fingers twitched. He thought of his mother watching him with wide, fearful eyes. He thought of the jury, waiting for him to speak. He thought of Captain Grant, watching like he already knew the answer. Noah's heart slammed against his ribs. And then, he stood. The room held its breath, and Noah Carter made his choice. Noah had made his choice. He was going to fight. But before he could speak, before he could seal his fate with words, his mother spoke first. Noah. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was broken. Monica Carter stood slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. Baby, please. Her voice cracked, and Noah's resolve nearly shattered with it. Please stop. The courtroom went still. She took a step forward, her eyes locked onto his. There was no anger in them, no disappointment, only fear, deep, primal, soul-crushing fear. They will hurt you. Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. You think they won't? You think because you have the truth, you're safe? A bitter, painful laugh escaped her lips. The truth doesn't keep us safe, Noah. The words landed like a blow. Because she was right. The truth hadn't kept Ellis safe. The truth hadn't stopped them from dragging Noah out of a library in cuffs. And it sure as hell wouldn't stop Captain Grant from doing whatever needed to be done to silence him. She took another step closer. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. I can't lose you. Her voice cracked again. I can't. I won't. Noah's throat tightened. This was his mother, the woman who had raised him to be strong, to speak up, to fight back. And now she was begging him to stop. Noah felt his chest ache. For the first time, his conviction wavered. Could he do this? Could he really? The weight of his mother's pain was unbearable. Then another voice cut through the air. If he doesn't fight, then what happens to the next kid? Noah's head snapped up. Jamal, his best friend. His brother in everything but blood. Jamal stood at the back of the courtroom, his hands clenched into fists. His voice didn't waver. You think this ends if Noah stops? It doesn't. His words rang through the courtroom like a warning, like a truth no one wanted to say out loud. If he sits down, if he lets them win, then next time it'll be me. Or another black boy in a hoodie walking home. Or some kid just trying to get to school. Jamal's voice grew louder, stronger. How many more times are we going to let them do this to us? The room tensed. Even Judge Calloway looked affected. Jamal turned to Monica. His voice softened, but his words didn't lose their weight. I know you're scared, Miss Carter. I know. A pause, a breath, but I'm scared too. And then he looked at Noah, right into his soul. If you stop now, who's next? Silence. Deep, heavy, unforgiving. Noah Carter had never felt the weight of his own existence more than in that moment. Noah's hands tightened against the table. His mother's fear was suffocating. Jamal's defiance was unrelenting. And he was caught between them. He swallowed hard, his gaze flicking to Monica's hands, shaking. Then to Jamal's fists, clenched, not in anger, but in desperation. His mother wanted to save his life. Jamal wanted him to save more than just himself. Noah could feel the weight of both their fears, but only one of them could be right. What would happen if he sat down? He knew the answer. The system wouldn't stop, not with him, not with the next kid, not until someone forced them to stop. His heart slammed against his ribs, and then he stood. The room held its breath. Monica let out a quiet sob. pressing her hands to her mouth. Jamal nodded once, just slightly, and across the courtroom Captain Grant shifted, not much, just a slow adjustment of his watch, a flicker of a glance toward the door, a movement that meant nothing to most people. But to Noah, it meant he had just made the wrong kind of enemy. The courtroom doors swung open. Noah Carter stepped inside, his hands gripping a folder so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The room was packed. More reporters, more cameras, more eyes watching his every move. Captain Grant was there, sitting in his usual spot, unbothered, because as far as he was concerned, he had already won. He had made a witness disappear. He had sent a message loud and clear. He had made Noah choose between survival and truth. And yet, Noah had come back. Judge Calloway lifted an eyebrow as Noah approached the defense table. "Mr. Carter, I assume you're ready to proceed?" Noah placed the folder down deliberately. Then he looked directly at Captain Grant. "Your Honor," Noah said, his voice steady, "I have new evidence." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Grant's fingers twitched, a small, almost imperceptible movement. For the first time, he looked interested. Noah took a slow breath, then flipped open the folder. A printed security log, a timestamp, a signature. He turned to the judge. "I have official records from the public library. Not only do they confirm that I checked out a book at 8:42 p.m., but," he slid another page forward, "they also show that the library's security cameras captured me inside the building at that exact time." Judge Calloway frowned, reaching for the paper. "Security footage?" Noah nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Footage that places me in the library at the exact moment the crime took place. Footage that law enforcement never included in their report." Gasps. The sound of camera shutters clicking filled the room. Moore's expression darkened. He reached for the file, scanning it quickly, his jaw clenched. Noah turned back toward Captain Grant. The captain didn't move, but something had shifted. For the first time, the power wasn't in his hands. Judge Calloway leaned forward. "Mr. Moore, can you explain why this evidence wasn't submitted earlier?" Moore hesitated. "Your Honor, I wasn't aware of this footage." Noah's voice cut through the air like a blade. "But someone was." He turned, eyes locking onto Grant. "Because someone made sure it disappeared." The room erupted. Grant didn't flinch, but his fingers stilled against the armrest. The same man who had smirked, who had toyed with him, who had made people vanish like pieces on a chessboard, was suddenly very, very still. Judge Calloway's voice dropped. "Captain Grant, do you have any response to this?" Grant leaned back slightly, adjusting his jacket. His smile returned, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't answer to children, Your Honor." The words were dismissive, effortless, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Noah didn't blink. He wasn't a child anymore. He was his worst nightmare. Because Noah Carter had just exposed the cracks in the system. And now, everyone was watching. The gavel rested in Judge Calloway's hand, but for the first time in his career, he hesitated before delivering a verdict. For years, he had believed in the system, followed its rules, trusted its process, and today, he had almost sentenced an innocent child. Noah Carter had stood before him, unshaken, unrelenting. Not just fighting for himself, but for every kid who had ever been in his place. Calloway exhaled. His fingers tightened around the gavel. "The court finds the defendant, Noah Carter, not guilty." The words rang through the room, but there was no celebration, no cheers, no applause, just the sound of a mother exhaling for the first time in weeks. Prosecutor Daniel Moore sat motionless. The weight of his own failure pressed down on him. For years he had trusted the system, defended it, fought for it. But today, he had tried to convict a child based on assumptions. No real evidence, no real case, just a belief that the system must be right. Now, he knew better. Slowly, Moore stood. His eyes met Noah's. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. A silent acknowledgement. "You were right. I was wrong." Then, without another word, he walked out of the courtroom. Across the room, Captain Grant remained seated, unbothered, as if none of this mattered. Investigations were already underway. The headlines were spreading. He was losing his badge. His reputation was unraveling. But he wasn't afraid, because he understood something the rest of the room didn't. The system wasn't built on men like him. It was built to survive men like him. And as long as the machine kept running, someone else would take his place. Grant rose slowly, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. Before leaving, he turned to Noah and smirked. You got lucky today, kid. His voice was calm, almost amused. But luck runs out. Then he walked out. No handcuffs, no consequences. Just a man who knew the system would protect him. Noah stood still, watching Grant go. He had won. He had proved his innocence. He had exposed the cracks in the system. But justice hadn't been served. He turned, finding his mother in the crowd. Monica Carter's hands were still pressed over her mouth. Tears ran down her face. Not tears of joy, tears of relief. Because today she got to take her son home. But what about the next kid? What about the ones who never made it out? Noah swallowed hard. He reached for his mother's hands, covering them with his own. His voice was steady when he whispered, "I didn't win, I just got started." If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe for more powerful stories that shine a light on truth and justice. Your support isn't just a click, it's what keeps us going, inspiring us to create meaningful content that sparks conversation and change. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time. Subscribe now, and let's keep the conversation alive.